I'm going to take my 15 minutes to talk about what a small NGO does, what it looks like, how it acts, and how it can collaborate. I think we've entered a new dawn or a new age for international aid. It's one where competitiveness is no longer needed, and that mass collaboration is the only way that we can be efficient in the way that we do aid. I'm going to quickly talk about us, and then I'll go into some projects just to represent what a collaborative program looks like. So our organization is very focused. We provide architects, engineers, and building professionals to do pro bono services and to look at building structures for communities in need. These are not just in disasters, but also in areas of systemic poverty. What I do want to note, and I think will be highlighted by Oxfam GB, is that we tend to talk about the first responders. They're the ones on TV that you see. We are not the first responders. We're the last responders. We're usually the last in and last out. And when you commit to looking at long-term development, you can't say, well, I'll be there for a year, or I'll be there for a few months, or I'll be there till aid dries up. You have to commit to at least 4 to 5 years, because that's strategically, that's where impact happens, when you can commit your team on a long-term basis. We started in 1999. I trained as an architect here in London, practiced, moved to the States, focused primarily looking at issues of homelessness. It was there, and my connection to Martin was the reaction to the lack of housing for returning refugees in Kosovo sparked the organization to start. And since then, we've worked in 38 countries and have built structures for about 1 million beneficiaries. We're headquartered in San Francisco, but as you can see, we have regional offices worldwide. We've been involved in 7 post-disaster reconstruction programs, and around about 40% of our work right now is in Haiti. We didn't just show up in Haiti, we've been working there prior. Last year, I was asked to do a building assessment report after the flooding in Gonaïves. I ended that report to our client saying that Haiti's building stock is a disaster waiting to happen. Pretty ominous words a few months later. We work with a lot of people. We're equal opportunity offenders. We believe that collaboration and open source management is the only way to move in a very diverse and a very quick-moving issue such as reconstruction. Locally, we have chapters. These are design professionals focused on local issues. Here in London, we have a very large chapter that is working on everything from homelessness to social issues, and I'm sure they'll be outside afterwards if you'd like to talk to them. But these chapters represent around about 5,600 professionals. At the heart is the people, and your organization is only as good as the people you have on the ground. These are people that are committed to the long term. They do a year to 2 years tour of duty with us. They're licensed professionals. And this isn't the kind of male, pale, and stale architecture firm that you might see in our industry. It's as diverse as the work that we have. Of note that when you're working globally, you have to understand that the skill set locally is as strong as international. So you can't just airdrop in professionals thinking that that's the way that work gets done. It's about empowering, support, and supporting local professionals. And then our organization looks at community-led design and construction. It's not about putting a logo on a building. It's about empowering the local community to build not just the structures that they live in, but their future. And here are some of the projects that we're doing right now, currently in 15 countries. I wanted to show workflow and financial data. The reason I want to do that is a new paradigm in the way NGOs are working. It's about transparency. One thing I should note is our average donor is about 32. 90% of our donations come in online, so social networking and transparency of our reporting is all done online, allowing our donors to see firsthand where funds are done and how it's being used. As you can see, we've been growing rapidly over time, and these are sort of numbers that you see on many NGOs. The top chart is probably more important, that small nonprofits have the benefit of being able to having a diverse portfolio of funding. So when things like the financial crisis happens and foundations suddenly stop giving funds to nonprofits, you're not then saying no to the clients that you've promised to work for. So that was the point, was the tugboat and the oil tanker, is that there are thousands of nimble nonprofits that can move and react to problems on the ground. But this isn't to say that we're different. When I talk about tanker, I talk about it in the good sense, that you have an NGO that has a direct mission, and they'll go from A to B slowly, but they'll get there. It's not that they don't fulfill their mission, they fulfill their mission. But with the tugboats organization, many of us can collaborate and be as powerful, as impactful as a large NGO, or we can hook on to an oil tanker or NGO, and we can steer them into a direction that we think is more sustainable. We begin to learn from each other, both best practices and worst practices. When somebody says to you, I share my best practices, your follow-up question should be, do you share your worst practices? Because I think the failure of NGOs and of the architectural profession is that we don't share our problems and our failures as much as we love to share our winning solutions. A quick project. This is a community project that we did in partnership with UN Habitat. We helped create a federation. This is essentially a banking mechanism for the local community to gain ownership of the process. Gandhi once said, be the change you want to see in the world. The reality in our world is you should be the bank, because the financial mechanisms for communities on the ground are just not there in post-disaster situations. So you as an aid agency have to take very kind of interesting mechanisms to make sure that funding flows directly to the community, and it's done in a secure way with transparency and oversight. Our architect works, lives in the community, develops designs and constructions, with the exception of the United States, which tend to really love fossil fuels. Almost 100% of our buildings are off the grid. We're not sustainable because it's cool or hip, but really it's a matter of survival when you're dealing with clients that are living on less than $1 a day. So introduction of solar, wind, rainwater catchment systems is done really to allow the self-sufficiency of a community. But also is empowering in the process. So these are design charrettes that are done twice a week over many months. And this isn't just about the design of the building, but developing a tendering process and starting small businesses around reconstruction. So this is about that kind of micro enterprise that happens. And we can use reconstruction as a method to jumpstart small business development. Other thing to note is all of our work is open sourced. Any project we do is under a Creative Commons license, which means that any organization can replicate our buildings for free. They don't even have to ask for our permission. They can just go onto our network, download all the documentation, read all our project reports, read all the financial data, and they can adapt that building. And with a Creative Commons license, they give attribution to that designer, and so also have access to that designer to ask some of the questions that are usually answered on the ground by the person. Job creation, and this is something that Oxfam does very well, but there's a way that we can do this in partnering with a lot of organizations. With this, we partnered with Practical Action, a fantastic organization here in the UK, who came in and trained a number of the locals so that they could start businesses. And then integration of sustainable methods of construction, as I mentioned earlier. I also want to note that culture is an element of sustainability. It's not just about the materials you use or the energy you produce, but the culture within a community really defines the sustainability. People don't like ugly buildings. If you design an ugly building, people won't maintain them. But you can't define beauty as a kind of Western notion of this is beautiful because this is what the halls of academia have told you what is beauty. By living and understanding the culture for many, many months in conversation, in friendship, you begin to understand what matters and how can you create transgenerational sustainability through empowering them, through embedding cultural elements. and understanding that buildings are just structures without people, and to make sure that you program the building such that it's filled throughout the day. The other thing is that we also got criticism on this building because we actually added a cricket pitch. The reason we did that was interesting. As Martin pointed out, this is actually an area that was in conflict before the tsunami. And we used the sports facility as a way to bring Tamil, Muslim, and Sinhalese groups together to kind of broker a small peace accord between villages and just say, okay, let's put this issue on the table just while we construct these communities, because we're working in multiple communities and we can actually share our knowledge together. So we used cricket simply as a way to bring communities together. So we let them fight it out on the pitch rather than in their villages. I want to mention, this is the way old aid looked: a centralized system of governance and management. You would have a head of an organization with a team of experts that would distribute information into the field. Luckily, this is dead. This no longer happens. This is what aid currently looks like now. You have a decentralized system where you have regional offices and regional representatives who can make decisions on behalf of that main organization. What we'd hope to see with smaller organizations, the only way they can collaborate is this system, which is a distributed network. Those three images were actually done in 1962 by Paul Baran and were the basis of what we now call the internet. These three images have probably shaped our modern day times, and I think in the aid world there's a way that we can be open and collaborate with skill set. We just be honest about what we've got, we honest about our shortfalls, and honest about our strengths. And we can work with many, many different partners. And that's where open source comes in. I got 5 minutes? Okay. So these numbers are pretty staggering. You may know them. The number of people living at the bottom of the pyramid. The number of people about to power up. This is a number that not many people know, that 2 billion people are about to get electricity in the next 10 years. That's a massive number. And what does that mean if we're putting basically failed first world solutions into developing and emerging markets? What's fortunate is that we're having these leapfrog technologies, and more exciting is leap back technologies, technologies developed in emerging markets that are now being adapted for the first world as a way to make us more sustainable. Many people don't realize that in the developing world, we are known as the overdeveloped world. So there's actually a great competition right now for designers from the developing world to come up with solutions to the problems of the developed world. It's running right now, and it'll be great to see how they're going to deal with our issues of obesity and overconsumption. When you talk to people with a few dollars a day, they don't think of themselves as poor. When you talk to your neighbors, nobody thinks of them as poor. In America, where I live, nobody says that they're poor. They say they're the emerging middle class. They're moving upward. And there are 4 billion people that are in this bracket globally. And when they have a little bit of money, they don't spend it on betting on the World Cup. They spend it on healthcare for their family, education for their kids, and improving their living standards, which means there's a multi-billion-dollar industry happening every single day in these three sectors. And understanding that if you're not tapping into this, that you're really negating and could be stunting these industries by throwing free aid into them as a way to help. So we have to be smart in the way that we do this. What's important to the architects in the room is we're going to build twice the number of physical structures in the history of time in the next century. What does that mean in urbanization? Because it's not going to be the Dubais of the world. It's going to be the Mumbais of the world. And what are the structures of the future going to look like? So it's important that we open up our innovations. We did that. I was fortunate enough to get something called the TED Prize a few years ago. And with that, I asked to create something called the Open Architecture Network as a way to open source and manage projects online and share them openly. In 3 years, 5,000 projects are now open sourced globally that people can download and replicate, and over 25,000 construction professionals are part of this network. These projects go from the sublime to the ridiculous, looking at low-cost housing, looking at mobile camel clinics. This is a doctor in northern Kenya actually puts up a tent and a clinic and treats patients in a community. And then at the end of the week, wraps up the clinic, puts it on the back of the camel, which has a solar panel on top, whacks the camel on the arse. It walks to the next village, and it generates the power to run the clinic in the next village. This was a design developed by a 19 and a 20-year-old. But why should you wait 20 years to become an established architect to have your idea realized? When there's a time of need and there's a good idea, innovation works in an open source mechanism. So a group in Kenya said, look, we were willing to give this a try, and sure enough, it worked. So the idea of jump-starting innovation only happens through open source. And I think it's a good proponent where small NGOs can take the lead on this, while larger NGOs can act to scale it. So I'm going to skip through Haiti, because you'll see a lot of this. I will note that in less than 30 days, we'll be entering into hurricane season. So while we note that this is an earthquake with 8 large predicted storms coming up the Gulf. So what does that mean when 200,000 people are in tents? It sounds alarmist, but I think what we need to understand is that there's a continual disaster that's happening with the ever-changing climate and issues of poverty compounding these areas of high risk. We'll talk about aid and the way it gets distributed. This was a napkin sketch done internally in the US. Fortunately, we have some folks in some meetings looking at how funding gets distributed. This is a hierarchical standard, and while we can point out all the problems of this, we should also point out that there's millions and millions of dollars flying in suitcases on private jets of people well-meaning dumping them in the country because they see kids on TV in a terrible way and just have to respond. We have to be smart and pragmatic in the way that we respond to disasters, and we have to be very open and transparent, because your tax dollars are part of that $5.26 billion. And we have to understand that whilst we're disconnected from international aid, if you are the more conservative-minded, you would say, well, it's my money, I should at least see what's happening to it. So again, let's be transparent. And let's understand that in these communities, the change is happening, but it's happening slowly. And to understand that families are going back into their homes, communities are going back into the schools, whether NGOs like it or not. We cannot stop them. But what we can do is set up a strategy that will allow for rebuilding in a way that's pragmatic and long-term. We also, and I mentioned this is outside the green zone, this was the problem with Katrina. We worked in Biloxi, we did over 700 homes, and we did a number of community facilities. When you talk to most people around the world, they think that Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. All they want to talk about is New Orleans. But there was dozens of towns and cities that were struck by that disaster, ripped from their foundations, and the media didn't show up because it wasn't sexy. Now, Port-au-Prince has hotels and restaurants and nice places for journalists to hang out, and there's Wi-Fi and there's some great food. But to go out into the community, into the outskirts, that really takes real journalism. That takes real pressure. And I really urge people that when they think about responding to Haiti, that don't just go to the places that are on TV, or don't go to the places that are just near the airport, that to reach out to the outlying areas and understand that there is not a locational GPS for a disaster, that it does spread, and that there are areas that are neglected. So we have a one-stop shop. This means that anybody can come in, an NGO or a family, and to get pro bono design services. We're working with about a dozen agencies and a number of families for recovery. We put up this simple blackboard. If your name gets up on that board, we're not leaving until you get a building. That's the way it works. And we've done this time and time again. It's a very simple method, but what happens is people's friends and family comes in, and they understand expectations. And it means that they don't think they're getting a house next week. They understand that the whole community is going to take about 2 years to rebuild, so that we can be very visual in the way that we represent that. Earthquake-resistant housing manuals. We developed these in conjunction with a number of organizations online, with Haiti Rewired and others, to translate them into other languages. This was done in literally days and on the ground. Rebuilding 101 manuals, again, done in ways that can be shown in a diverse way of communication, and also translated online. Also, building inspectors and building inspections and training masons. This is something that we've done through small grants and working in collaboration with a lot of local NGOs.
We have a lot of flaking.
We have no time for that. We have no time for this. This is an idea of the pound is worth so little right now, I can't even do the exchange rate. It's like, well, I'll do it in dollars. These are schools that are about $35,000 to $50,000. These are schools about $100,000, and this is a school that's about 1 to 1.5 million. So looking at strategies of education is not just being a cookie cutter, but location specific, site specific, but also size specific. Also embedding agriculture in every element of education. If kids don't eat, they don't learn. And understanding that in a place where 66% of the country are based on an agricultural economy, you can't negate that from the education system. So making sure that you have edible schoolyards as well as agricultural education as part of high school level, as well as access to college. Open source housing that's distributed and allows anybody to replicate. And then, of course, open sourcing everything. I know I've run over. But these are a few things that we've learned to integrate culture in the process, to understand that just because an NGO is involved, it doesn't mean that it's doing good. But there are a lot of NGOs that are doing amazing work that don't get recognition. So whilst you read the bad stories in the newspaper, there's a million stories you don't read because they're not seeking a journalist to write a story on them. They're just doing the work because the community has asked for their help. And for the architects in the room, let's just note that just because they say it's green doesn't mean it's sustainable. This is Morrison's single-serve banana in a biodegradable packaging. And there's a lot of projects around the world that say it's carbon neutral, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's community benefit. So yes, planting trees is important, but making sure that we have energy-efficient, strong buildings that can withstand storms in the future is much more important to a community in high risk. So let's be honest, partnership and open collaboration is the key for implementation for small organizations, and adaptation and transparency is the key for scaled impact for large NGOs. Thank you.